I was standing in my driveway at 7 in the morning, coffee in hand, watching the delivery truck dump 3 cords of seasoned oak onto my property, when I noticed her marching across the street like a general heading into battle. Patricia Montgomery, president of the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association, wore her signature pearl necklace and a scowl that could curdle milk. My name is Quentin Ingram, and I had lived in this Portland, Oregon suburb for exactly 6 months, which apparently was long enough to become Patricia's newest target. The driver finished unloading, handed me the receipt, and drove off while Patricia stood at the edge of my driveway with her arms crossed. The pile of firewood sat there, beautiful and necessary, representing my preparation for the upcoming winter. I had a wood-burning stove that I planned to use regularly, and 3 cords seemed perfectly reasonable for a season. "Mr. Ingram," Patricia called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What exactly do you think you are doing?" I took a sip of my coffee and walked over, trying to maintain a friendly demeanor. "Morning, Patricia. Just got my winter wood delivered. Beautiful oak, been seasoning for 2 years. Her face reddened. "That monstrosity is a direct violation of our HOA covenants, codes, and restrictions. Section 12, Paragraph 4 clearly states that no outdoor storage shall exceed 48 cubic feet or be visible from the street." I glanced back at my wood pile. It was sitting in my driveway, sure, but I planned to stack it properly along the side of my house within the week. "Patricia, I literally just had it delivered 20 minutes ago. I am going to stack it neatly against the house, behind the fence line where it would not be visible from the street." "The violation exists now," she snapped. "You should have had arrangements to stack it immediately upon delivery." "I am documenting this." She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures from multiple angles, walking around my property line like a crime scene investigator. "Are you serious right now?" I asked, feeling my morning peace evaporating. "It is just firewood." "I will have it stacked by this weekend. The CCRs do not provide exceptions based on your personal timeline, Mr. Ingram. You will be receiving a formal violation notice, and fines will begin accruing at $50 per day starting tomorrow if this is not remedied." I felt my jaw clench. $50 per day for a wood pile that I fully intended to stack properly. This was insane. "Patricia, that is completely unreasonable. I work full-time during the week. I need the weekend to build proper stacking racks and organize everything." "Then perhaps you should have thought of that before ordering such an excessive amount of firewood," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Furthermore, I question whether 3 cords is even necessary. That seems excessive and potentially constitutes hoarding, which affects property values." "Hoarding?" I nearly laughed. "It is firewood for heat. We are in Oregon. It gets cold. This is a normal amount for someone who heats primarily with wood." "I will be consulting with the HOA board about this matter. Expect formal documentation by end of business today." Patricia turned on her heel and marched back across the street to her immaculate house, with its perfectly manicured lawn and not a single item out of place. I stood there, staring at the wood pile, feeling a mixture of frustration and disbelief. I had moved to Riverside Meadows because it seemed like a quiet, family-friendly neighborhood. The houses were nice, the streets were clean, and the location was convenient for my job as a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing plant downtown. What I had not anticipated was Patricia Montgomery and her reign of HOA terror. Over the next few hours, I tried to focus on work from my home office, but I kept glancing out the window at the wood pile. By noon, I decided to at least start organizing it. I went outside and began sorting the pieces, separating the larger logs from the smaller kindling, creating organized rows. It was satisfying work, physical and straightforward, unlike dealing with Patricia's bureaucratic nonsense. I had been working for about an hour when my neighbor, Tom Chen, walked over from the house to my left. Tom was a software developer in his early 30s, and we had bonded over beers a few times since I moved in. "Hey man, saw Patricia over here this morning," Tom said, shaking his head. "Let me guess, she is on the warpath about your firewood." $50 a day if I do not get it stacked immediately," I replied, wiping sweat from my forehead. "She called it hoarding." Tom laughed bitterly. "Last month she tried to fine me because my trash cans were visible from the street for 4 hours after trash pickup. 4 hours. She took time-stamped photos and everything." "How did you fight that?" "I did not. I paid the $100 fine because fighting it meant dealing with the HOA board, which is just Patricia and her 2 cronies, Linda and Susan. It is a kangaroo court. They always side with her." I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. So she just gets away with whatever she wants, pretty much. There are about 40 houses in this neighborhood, and most people just pay the fines and comply because it is easier than fighting. A few families have even moved because of her. The Johnsons down the street sold their house last year after Patricia harassed them for 6 months about their vegetable garden being too visible. "That is insane," I muttered, looking at my wood pile with fresh frustration. This was not just about firewood anymore. This was about someone abusing a small amount of power to make other people's lives miserable. Tom nodded. "Welcome to Riverside Meadows. My advice, just stack the wood and move on. It is not worth the stress." After Tom left, I spent another hour working on the wood, but I kept thinking about what he said. The idea of just rolling over and letting Patricia bully me did not sit right. I had not done anything wrong. The wood was temporary, it was necessary, and I was planning to stack it properly. The fact that she was threatening daily fines over something so minor felt like abuse of power. That evening, I received an email from the HOA board with a formal violation notice attached as a PDF. It was 3 pages long, filled with references to specific sections of the CCRs, and included the photos Patricia had taken that morning. The notice stated that I had until 5 p.m. the following day to completely remove or properly store the firewood or face $50 per day in fines, plus administrative fees and potential legal action. I sat at my kitchen table, reading through the document, feeling my blood pressure rise. The language was threatening, almost aggressive, as if I had committed some serious offense rather than having a temporary wood pile in my own driveway. At the bottom of the notice was a paragraph stating that the HOA board had discussed my flagrant disregard for community standards, and that I was now on their watch list for future violations. I drafted 3 different email responses, each one angrier than the last, before finally deleting them all. Responding while angry would not help. Instead, I decided to do some research. I spent the next 2 hours reading through the entire CCR document, all 47 pages of it, looking for anything I could use to push back against Patricia's overreach. What I found was interesting. While the CCRs did indeed have restrictions on outdoor storage, there was also language about reasonable temporary storage for home maintenance and improvement purposes. The document also stated that violation notices required a warning period of 7 days before fines could be assessed, except in cases of immediate danger or extreme circumstances. Armed with this information, I crafted a careful response email. I acknowledged receipt of the violation notice, referenced the sections about temporary storage and warning periods, and formally requested a 7-day extension to properly stack the firewood. I kept my tone professional, and cited the specific CCR sections that supported my position. I sent the email at 9 p.m. and tried to sleep, though I found myself lying awake thinking about the situation. It seemed absurd that I was losing sleep over firewood, but it was the principle of the thing. Patricia was clearly abusing her position, and someone needed to push back. The next morning, I woke up to an email response from Patricia, sent at 6:30 a.m. She must have been waiting to pounce on her inbox. The email denied my request for an extension, claiming that the temporary storage provision did not apply to excessive amounts of recreational materials, and that the 7-day warning period was at the board's discretion. She ended by reminding me that fines would begin accruing at 5 p.m. That day, I was reading this email over breakfast when I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, I found 2 police officers standing on my porch. My heart immediately started racing. "What could the police possibly want, Mr. Quentin Ingram?" the first officer asked. He was tall, probably in his late 30s, with a name tag that read Officer Martinez. "Yes, that is me," I replied, confused and worried. "We received a complaint about illegal dumping and potential fire code violations at this address," Officer Martinez said. "Mind if we take a look around?" "Illegal dumping," I repeated, then it clicked. "Wait, is this about my firewood?" The second officer, shorter and younger with a name tag reading Officer Patel, glanced at her partner with a knowing look. "Sir, we just need to verify the complaint. Can you show us what we are dealing with?" I led them around to the driveway where the wood pile sat, partially organized from my work the previous day. Officer Martinez walked around it, examining it carefully, while Officer Patel took some notes. "So this is firewood you purchased for personal use?" Officer Martinez asked. "Yes, 3 cords of seasoned oak. I have a wood burning stove and I am planning to use this for heat this winter. I had it delivered yesterday morning and I am in the process of stacking it properly along the side of my house." Officer Martinez nodded slowly. "And the person who called this in, they said it was illegal dumping. My HOA president, Patricia Montgomery, lives across the street. She is upset because the wood is currently in my driveway. I am planning to stack it this weekend, but she wants it done immediately and is threatening daily fines." Officer Patel looked up from her notes. "This is an HOA dispute, apparently," I said, feeling embarrassed that the police had been called for something so trivial. Officer Martinez sighed, the kind of deep, weary sigh of someone who had dealt with this kind of thing before. "Mr. Ingram, this is properly purchased firewood on your own property, correct?" "Correct. I have the receipt from the supplier if you need to see it." "That would not be necessary. This is clearly not illegal dumping. As for fire code, as long as you are not storing it within 15 feet of any structure, you are fine. Once you stack it against your house, just make sure there is adequate clearance from any doors or windows." "So I am not breaking any laws?" I asked, wanting to be absolutely clear. "No, sir. This is a civil matter between you and your HOA. We cannot enforce HOA rules unless there is an actual law being broken, which there is not in this case." Officer Martinez looked genuinely sympathetic. "Look, I have seen a lot of HOA disputes, and they can get nasty. My advice would be to document everything and maybe consult with a lawyer if they start imposing excessive fines." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Thank you, officers. I appreciate you coming out, even though this was a complete waste of your time." Officer Patel smiled slightly. "Part of the job. Though I have to say, calling the police over a wood pile is pretty excessive." As the officers were walking back to their patrol car, Officer Martinez paused and turned around. "Hey, Mr. Ingram, you said you are stacking this yourself?" "Yeah, planning to do it this weekend." He glanced at his watch, then at his partner. "We have about an hour left on our shift, and honestly, this is the most ridiculous call we have had all week. You need any help getting started?" I stared at him, surprised. "Are you serious?" "Why not?" Officer Martinez shrugged. "We are here anyway, and it would be nice to actually help someone instead of just dealing with nonsense complaints." Officer Patel grinned. "I grew up splitting and stacking wood with my dad. I am pretty good at it, actually." I could not believe what I was hearing. "I mean, if you are serious, I would absolutely appreciate the help. I have gloves and everything." And just like that, I found myself stacking firewood with 2 police officers in my driveway. Officer Martinez took off his utility belt and left it in the patrol car, rolling up his sleeves. Officer Patel did the same. I grabbed spare work gloves from my garage and we got to work. The system we developed was efficient. I would hand pieces to Officer Martinez, who would pass them to Officer Patel, who began creating a proper stack along the side fence line. We worked in comfortable rhythm, and as we did, we talked. "So how long have you lived here?" Officer Martinez asked, catching a log I tossed to him. "About 6 months. It seemed like a nice neighborhood when I moved in." "HOA neighborhoods can be tricky," Officer Patel said, carefully placing wood in a crisscross pattern to promote airflow. "My parents live in one, and their HOA president tried to fine them for painting their front door the wrong shade of white." "You are kidding," I said. "Nope. There were apparently 3 approved shades of white, and they picked one that was not on the list. Cost them $200. Officer Martinez shook his head. "I specifically bought a house outside of any HOA jurisdiction. I have a boat in my driveway and nobody can say a damn thing about it." As we worked, I noticed Patricia emerge from her house across the street. She stood on her porch, staring at us, her face turning progressively redder. The sight of 2 police officers helping me stack the very wood pile she had reported filled me with a petty satisfaction I probably should not have enjoyed as much as I did. "I think your HOA president is about to blow a gasket," Officer Patel observed, following my gaze. "Good," I muttered, then immediately felt bad. "Sorry, that was petty. Hey, from what I have seen, she called the police on you for having firewood. You are entitled to a little petness," Officer Martinez said with a slight smile. We continued working, and within 45 minutes, we had made serious progress. What had been a chaotic pile was now a neatly organized stack along my fence line, exactly where I had planned to put it. It was not completely finished, but it was clearly in the process of being properly stored, and it was definitely not visible from the street. As we were putting the last few pieces in place, Patricia marched across the street for the second time in 2 days. This time, she looked absolutely furious. "Officers," she called out in a shrill voice, "I called you here to address a violation, not to help him perpetrate it further." Officer Martinez straightened up and his demeanor changed instantly. The friendly guy I had been working with disappeared, replaced by a professional police officer. "Madam, we investigated your complaint and found no illegal activity. Mr. Ingram is storing legally purchased firewood on his own property, which is not a police matter." "But the HOA rules clearly state," Patricia began. "Madam, we do not enforce HOA rules," Officer Patel interrupted. "If you have a dispute with your neighbor regarding HOA regulations, that is a civil matter. Filing a false police report, however, could be considered a criminal matter." Patricia's face went pale. "False report? I did not file a false report. There is a clear violation of our community standards." "You reported illegal dumping," Officer Martinez said, his voice firm. "This is not illegal dumping. You also reported potential fire code violations. We found none." Using emergency services for civil disputes is inappropriate and could be considered misuse of 911. I did not call 911, Patricia protested. I called the non-emergency line. Regardless, madam, please do not contact the police about HOA disputes unless there is an actual crime being committed. Officer Martinez's tone made it clear the conversation was over. Patricia stood there sputtering for a moment, then turned and stormed back to her house. I watched her go, feeling a mix of vindication and concern. I had a feeling this was far from over. After Patricia left, Officer Patel pulled out her phone and took a few pictures of the wood stack. "Document everything," she advised. "Take pictures with timestamps showing when you completed the stacking. Keep all emails and correspondence from the HOA. If this escalates, you will want evidence." "You think it will escalate?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. People who call the cops over firewood. "Yeah, it will probably escalate," Officer Martinez said. "But you are in the right here. Just stay calm, stay professional, and do not give her any ammunition." The officers left shortly after, and I stood in my driveway looking at the partially completed wood stack. I spent the rest of the day finishing the job, creating neat rows of firewood along my fence line, properly elevated off the ground on pallets, with a tarp covering the top to keep rain off while allowing air circulation. It looked professional and tidy, and it was completely invisible from the street. I took extensive photos from every angle, including some from the street showing that the wood could not be seen from public view. I timestamped everything and saved it all to a dedicated folder on my computer. That evening, I sent a polite email to the HOA board with photos attached, informing them that the firewood had been properly stacked in compliance with the CCRs and was no longer visible from the street. I referenced the specific sections about outdoor storage and even included measurements showing that my stack was within the allowable dimensions when calculated as a linear fence line storage rather than a freestanding pile. The response came within an hour, and it was not from Patricia. It was from Linda Hoffman, the HOA vice president, and her tone was markedly different. "Mr. Ingram, thank you for addressing the storage concern. However, the board has identified several additional issues with your property that require immediate attention. Your lawn has areas of discoloration that do not meet community standards. Your mailbox shows signs of weathering and needs repainting. There are leaves in your gutters visible from the street. Please address these issues within 48 hours or face fines of $25 per day per violation." I read the email twice, feeling my stomach turn. This was retaliation, plain and simple. My lawn was fine, maybe not golf course perfect, but well within normal standards. My mailbox was a standard postal service box that was maybe 5 years old. And yes, it was fall in Oregon, so there were leaves in my gutters, just like every other house on the street. I walked outside in the fading daylight and looked at my property with fresh eyes. Then I walked down the street, looking at the other houses. Tom's lawn had more brown patches than mine. The Hendersons 3 houses down had a mailbox that was actively rusting. Every single house had leaves in the gutters because it was autumn and trees shed leaves. This was targeted harassment, and I needed to figure out how to fight it. The next morning, I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, and spent the day researching HOA law in Oregon. What I learned was both encouraging and frustrating. Oregon law did provide some protections for homeowners against HOA overreach, but fighting an HOA usually required either organizing a majority of homeowners to vote out the board or taking legal action, both of which were time-consuming and expensive. I also discovered that Oregon law required HOAs to follow their own procedures as outlined in their governing documents. I pulled up the Riverside Meadows CCRs again and read through them more carefully, this time focusing on the enforcement procedures. That is when I found it. According to the CCRs, violation notices had to be specific, documented with evidence, and homeowners had the right to request a hearing before the full board before any fines were assessed. Additionally, the board had to provide written notice of any board meetings at least 14 days in advance, and homeowners had the right to attend and speak. The violation notice I had received about my lawn, mailbox, and gutters had been sent without any photographic evidence and without offering me the opportunity for a hearing. It was procedurally improper according to the HOA's own rules. I crafted another careful response, citing the specific procedural requirements and formally requesting a hearing before the board. I also requested copies of all photographic evidence of the alleged violations and the specific standards I was supposedly violating. I sent the email and decided to take a different approach to the situation. Instead of just defending myself, I needed to go on offense. I started by walking around the neighborhood with my phone, taking pictures. I documented every slightly brown lawn, every weathered mailbox, every gutter with leaves, every minor imperfection that Patricia would consider a violation if she was being consistent. What I found was revealing. The Riverside Meadows neighborhood was full of minor imperfections. It was a lived-in community, not a museum display. But only certain people seemed to get violation notices, and as I talked to neighbors over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Tom Chen had been targeted multiple times. The Patels, an elderly Indian couple, had received numerous violations for their garden decorations being culturally inappropriate. The Rodriguez family had been fined repeatedly for having toys in their front yard, despite having 3 young children. Meanwhile, Patricia's friends on the board, including Linda Hoffman and Susan Crawford, seemed to never receive violations despite having similar or worse issues with their properties. I began documenting everything. I created a spreadsheet tracking violations, who received them, and comparing them to the actual state of various properties. The pattern of selective enforcement was undeniable. A week after I sent my request for a hearing, I received a notice that the HOA board would be holding their monthly meeting and that I would be given 10 minutes to address the board regarding my violations. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at Patricia Montgomery's house. I spent the week preparing. I printed out photos, I organized my evidence of selective enforcement, and I reviewed Oregon HOA law. I also did something else. I created a simple flyer and distributed it to every house in the neighborhood. The flyer explained the situation with my firewood and the subsequent retaliation violations. It outlined the pattern of selective enforcement I had documented, and it invited every homeowner to attend the board meeting to observe how their HOA board operated. Thursday evening arrived, and I walked to Patricia's house with a folder full of documentation and a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I had no idea what to expect, but I was determined to stand my ground. Patricia's house was a large colonial-style home with imposing white columns. I rang the doorbell and she answered with a tight smile that did not reach her eyes. "Mr. Ingram, the board is meeting in the dining room. Follow me." She led me through a house that looked like a furniture showroom, everything perfectly coordinated and pristine. The dining room had a large table where Linda Hoffman and Susan Crawford were already seated, papers spread before them. They looked up as I entered, their expressions cool and unwelcoming. "Please sit," Patricia said, gesturing to a single chair that had been placed at the opposite end of the table, facing the three board members like a defendant facing judges. I sat down, placing my folder on my lap. Before anyone could speak, the doorbell rang. Patricia frowned and went to answer it. I heard Tom Chen's voice, saying he was there to observe the meeting. Patricia returned looking annoyed, followed by Tom. I was not aware we would have observers tonight. The CCRs state that board meetings are open to all homeowners, Tom said pleasantly, taking a seat along the wall. The doorbell rang again, and then again. Over the next 10 minutes, 15 homeowners showed up, filling Patricia's dining room and spilling into the adjacent living room. I saw the Patels, the Rodriguez family, the Hendersons, and many others I recognized from the neighborhood. Patricia looked increasingly agitated as her home filled with people. "This is highly irregular," she said, her voice tight. "This is completely within the rules," countered Mr. Patel, a retired lawyer who I had spoken with during my neighborhood research. "Board meetings are open to all homeowners. Perhaps you are not used to people actually attending, but that does not make it irregular." Patricia's face flushed, but she could not argue. She returned to her seat at the head of the table and shuffled her papers with sharp, angry movements. "Let us proceed," Patricia said coldly. "The board is here to address multiple violations by Mr. Quentin Ingram regarding property maintenance and community standards. Mr. Ingram, you have 10 minutes to respond to the charges." I opened my folder and pulled out my first document. "Thank you. First, I would like to address the original firewood complaint. As you can see from these photographs, the firewood has been properly stacked in accordance with CCR's Section 12, Paragraph 4. It is not visible from the street and does not exceed the dimensional requirements. The police confirmed that no laws or fire codes were violated." "The police were called due to your violation," Patricia interrupted. "Actually, you called the police claiming illegal dumping, which was false. The officers confirmed there was no illegal activity and advised that HOA disputes are civil matters that do not warrant police involvement." I saw several homeowners in the room nodding. I continued. "Regarding the subsequent violations concerning my lawn, mailbox, and gutters, I requested photographic evidence and specific standards I was allegedly violating. I have received no response to that request, which is required under Section 18, Paragraph 2 of the CCRs before any fines can be assessed." Linda Hoffman spoke up for the first time. "The violations are self-evident. We do not need to provide photographic evidence for issues that are clearly visible." "Actually, according to your own rules, you do," Mr. Patel interjected from his seat along the wall. "Section 18 is quite clear about the documentation requirements for enforcement actions." I pulled out my next set of documents. "Furthermore, I have documented that the alleged violations are not consistently enforced. These photos show similar or more severe issues on at least 12 other properties in the neighborhood, none of which have received violation notices." I passed around the photos, watching as the board members' faces tightened. The homeowners in the room began murmuring, recognizing their own properties and others. "This demonstrates a clear pattern of selective enforcement," I continued. "Oregon Revised Statutes, Section 94.630, requires that HOAs enforce their rules in a consistent and non-discriminatory manner. The evidence shows that is not happening in Riverside Meadows." Patricia's hands were clenched on the table. "This board has the authority to determine which violations require immediate attention based on their severity and impact on the community. Then, you should be able to explain why my lawn with minimal discoloration, requires immediate attention, but Mrs. Henderson's lawn, which is 50% brown, does not, I replied evenly. Or why my mailbox needs repainting but Mr. Thompson's actively rusting mailbox is acceptable. The room was silent, except for the sound of papers being passed around. I could see several homeowners taking photos of my documentation with their phones. The board will take your concerns under advisement, Patricia said stiffly. However, this does not absolve you of your current violations. Actually, without proper documentation and evidence of consistent enforcement, I believe it does, Mr. Patel said, standing up. I have been reviewing the CCRs and Oregon HOA law since Mr. Ingram distributed his flyer. The board is not following its own procedures, and the selective enforcement pattern could expose the HOA to legal liability. Susan Crawford, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke. Perhaps we have been too hasty in some of our enforcement actions. Maybe we should review our procedures to ensure we are being consistent. Patricia shot her a sharp look, but Susan did not back down. I am just saying, if we are not following our own rules, that is a problem. The meeting devolved into chaos after that. Multiple homeowners began voicing their complaints about previous violations they had received. The Patels talked about being targeted for their cultural decorations. The Rodriguez family described being fined for letting their children play in their own yard. Tom Chen presented a list of 6 separate violations he had received in 8 months, each one seemingly trivial. Patricia tried to maintain control, but she was losing the room. Finally, Mr. Patel stood up again and his voice cut through the noise. I move that we hold a special election to recall the current board and elect new members who will follow the CCRs and enforce rules fairly and consistently. The room went silent. Patricia stood up so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. You cannot do that, she said, but her voice wavered. Actually, according to Section 23 of the CCRs, any homeowner can call for a special election with a petition signed by 20% of the homeowners. We have 42 homes in this community, so we would need 9 signatures. I count at least 15 homeowners in this room right now, not including the board members. Tom Chen stood up. I will sign that petition. So will I, said Mrs. Patel. Me too, added Mr. Rodriguez. Within minutes, 23 homeowners had committed to signing a recall petition. Patricia stood at the head of the table, her face pale, her carefully constructed authority crumbling around her. This meeting is adjourned, she announced abruptly, gathering her papers. We are not done discussing Mr. Ingram's violations, Linda Hoffman said, looking confused. Yes, we are, Susan Crawford said quietly. I think it is clear that we need to reconsider how this board has been operating. I left Patricia's house that night feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. What had started as a fight over firewood had turned into a full neighborhood revolt against an abusive HOA board. Over the next 2 weeks, things moved quickly. Mr. Patel drafted a formal recall petition, and within 3 days, it had 31 signatures, far more than the required 9. Patricia tried to fight it, claiming procedural issues with the petition, but Mr. Patel had been meticulous in following every requirement outlined in the CCRs. A special election was scheduled for 1 month out. In the meantime, Patricia's power had been effectively neutered. She tried to issue more violation notices, but homeowners simply ignored them, knowing that the board's days were numbered. I received one more threatening letter from Patricia, claiming that my wood stack was still visible from certain angles and demanding I move it. I responded with photos from every possible street view showing that it was completely hidden. I also included a note reminding her that any fines assessed during this period would be contested in the upcoming election. The day after I sent that email, something unexpected happened. I came home from work to find Patricia on my doorstep, but this time she was not aggressive. She looked tired and smaller somehow, without her usual armor of righteous indignation. "Mr. Ingram, could we talk?" she asked quietly. I was surprised but invited her in. We sat in my living room, an awkward silence hanging between us. "I want to apologize," Patricia said finally. "Not for enforcing the rules, but for how I went about it. I have been the HOA president for 8 years, and somewhere along the way, I think I forgot that I was supposed to be serving the community, not controlling it. I did not know what to say, so I just listened. My husband died 3 years ago," she continued. "We lived in this house for 25 years, raised our kids here. After he passed, I threw myself into the HOA because it gave me something to focus on, something I could control. But I realize now that I have been making everyone miserable, including myself." "Patricia, I appreciate the apology," I said carefully. "But the issue was not just about control, it was about fairness. You targeted certain people while giving others a pass." She nodded slowly. "You are right, I did, and I do not have a good excuse for it. I have been holding on to this position because it made me feel important, but I have been doing it all wrong." We talked for another hour. Patricia told me about her life before her husband died, how they had planned to travel in retirement, but he had passed away before they got the chance. She talked about feeling lost and purposeless, and how the HOA had become her entire identity. I found myself feeling sympathetic despite everything. Patricia had been a bully and had abused her power, but she was also a lonely widow who had made mistakes. "I am going to resign before the recall election," Patricia said as she was leaving. "And I am going to recommend that Susan take over as president temporarily. She has been trying to get me to ease up on enforcement for months, but I would not listen." "I think that is a good decision," I said. "For what it is worth, your wood stack does look very professional," Patricia added with a slight, sad smile. "And I hope you stay warm this winter." After she left, I sat in my living room thinking about everything that had happened. What had started as a conflict over firewood had exposed deep problems in how our neighborhood was being run, but it had also revealed the human pain behind the tyranny. Patricia was not a monster, just a hurting person who had channeled her pain in destructive ways. True to her word, Patricia submitted her resignation the next day. Linda Hoffman resigned as well, citing personal reasons. Susan Crawford became interim president and immediately announced that the board would be reviewing all pending violations and refunding fines that had been improperly assessed. The special election still went forward, but it became less about removing a bad board and more about building a better one. Tom Chen ran for president and won easily. Mr. Patel joined the board as vice president. Mrs. Rodriguez became secretary. They ran on a platform of fair enforcement, community building, and actually maintaining common areas rather than harassing homeowners over minor issues. I declined to run for the board myself, feeling that I had done enough by standing up to the original problem. I wanted to just live quietly in my house and enjoy my fireplace. Winter came to Portland with its typical cold rain and occasional snow. My wood-burning stove worked beautifully, and the 3 cords of oak burned warm and clean. I thought about those logs every time I loaded the stove, remembering the absurd battle they had sparked. One evening in December, I heard a knock on my door. When I opened it, I found Officer Martinez standing there, out of uniform. "Hey, Mr. Ingram," he said with a smile. "I was in the neighborhood and wanted to check in. How did everything work out with your HOA situation?" "Come in," I said, surprised but pleased to see him. I gave him the full story over coffee, including Patricia's resignation and the new board. "That is a good outcome," Officer Martinez said. "Most HOA disputes do not resolve that well. Usually, they just get more and more toxic until someone moves. It helped having you and Officer Patel here that day," I said. Patricia calling the cops was supposed to intimidate me, but having officers confirm that I was not breaking any laws gave me confidence to push back. "Just doing our job," he replied. Though I have to say, helping stack that wood was the most enjoyable hour of that shift. My wife thought it was hilarious when I told her. We talked for a while longer, and Officer Martinez mentioned that he had grown up in a rural area where everyone heated with wood. He appreciated seeing someone in the suburbs doing the same. Before he left, he looked at my fireplace with the fire crackling warmly. "That is a good setup you have got there," he said. "Makes the whole house feel cozy." After he left, I sat by the fire thinking about community, power, and the importance of standing up for what is right even over something as simple as firewood. The battle with Patricia had taught me that bullies rely on people being too tired or intimidated to fight back. The moment you push back with evidence and confidence, their power evaporates. The new year arrived, and Riverside Meadows felt like a different place. Tom Chen and the new board implemented changes that made sense. They focused on actual community improvement, organizing neighborhood gatherings and addressing real maintenance issues with common areas. Violation notices became rare and were only issued for legitimate problems that affected the whole community. Patricia Montgomery kept to herself mostly. I would see her occasionally on walks, and we would exchange polite greetings. She seemed softer somehow, less rigid. I heard through Tom that she had started volunteering at a local senior center, finding a healthier outlet for her need to stay busy. In February, the neighborhood held a winter gathering at the community park. Tom had arranged for food trucks and a fire pit. As people gathered around the fire, someone mentioned how nice it would be to have fires like this more regularly. Tom looked at me with a grin. "Quentin, did you not have a bunch of firewood? Maybe you could contribute to the community for once instead of hoarding it all for yourself." Everyone laughed, including me. The joke only worked because everyone knew the ridiculous story of Patricia calling the cops over my wood pile. "I think I can spare a few logs for the greater good," I replied, playing along. Mrs. Patel came up to me later in the evening. "You know, Mr. Ingram, what you did was important, standing up to Patricia. A lot of us were too afraid or too tired to fight back. You showed us that we did not have to accept being bullied in our own neighborhood." "I just did not want to pay $50 a day for having firewood," I said, trying to deflect the praise. "You did more than that," she insisted. "You changed this community for the better." As I walked home that night, the cold February air crisp on my face, I thought about her words. I had not set out to be a community organizer or a rebel against HOA tyranny. I had just wanted to heat my house with wood and be left alone. But sometimes standing up for yourself ends up helping a lot of other people too. The rest of winter passed peacefully. My wood stack dwindled as I burned through the oak, and by April, I was down to about half a cord. I started researching suppliers for the next year's delivery, and this time I knew exactly how to handle it. I would have the wood delivered, stack it promptly, document everything, and if anyone had a problem, I had a whole neighborhood of allies who would back me up. In May, I attended an HOA board meeting, the first one under the new leadership. It was held at the community center rather than someone's home, and the atmosphere was completely different. Tom ran the meeting efficiently and democratically. When issues came up, The board asked for input from attending homeowners. Decisions were made transparently with clear reasoning. At one point, Tom brought up updating some of the CCRs to remove overly restrictive provisions that served no real purpose. The board voted to form a committee to review the entire document and propose changes that would be voted on by the full community. "Any volunteers for the CCR review committee?" Tom asked. Several hands went up, including mine. I figured if I was going to live under these rules, I might as well have a hand in making them reasonable. As I left that meeting, I ran into Susan Crawford in the parking lot. She had stayed on the board under the new administration, providing continuity and institutional knowledge. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Ingram," she said. "I knew Patricia was being too aggressive with enforcement, but I did not push back hard enough. I was complicit in a lot of what happened." "You voted to review procedures during that meeting at Patricia's house," I pointed out. "That took courage." "Too little, too late," Susan replied. "But I am trying to do better now. We all are." "That is all anyone can ask," I said. Summer arrived, and with it came the first real test of the new board's fair enforcement philosophy. The Hendersons decided to paint their house a shade of blue that was definitely not on the approved color list. The old board would have immediately issued a violation and demanded they repaint. Instead, Tom called a community meeting to discuss whether the color restriction made sense. The debate was lively. Some people argued that color restrictions protected property values. Others, including me, argued that allowing reasonable color variation made the neighborhood feel less sterile and controlled. In the end, the community voted to expand the approved color palette and to allow the Hendersons to keep their blue house. It was a small thing, but it represented a fundamental shift in how the neighborhood operated. Rules existed to serve the community, not to control it. In July, I got my next firewood delivery, 4 cords this time because I wanted to build up a surplus. I had arranged for the delivery on a Saturday so I could stack it immediately. Tom and several other neighbors came over to help, and we made it a social event, with burgers on the grill and cold drinks. As we worked, stacking wood in neat rows along my fence line, I thought about how different this was from the previous year. What had been a source of conflict and stress had become a community gathering. We laughed and joked, and someone made a comment about hoping Patricia would call the cops again so we could get Officer Martinez to come help. "I ran into him at a coffee shop last month," I told them. "He asked about the HOA situation and seemed genuinely glad it had worked out." "That guy was cool," Tom said. "Most cops would have just taken a statement and left, but he actually helped you stack the wood. That is going above and beyond." "It really was," I agreed. I should send a commendation letter to the police department. I did exactly that the following week, writing a detailed letter praising both Officer Martinez and Officer Patel for their professionalism, compassion, and willingness to help a citizen in a ridiculous situation. I got a nice response from their supervisor thanking me and letting me know the letter would go in their personnel files. August brought more community events under the new board. We had a neighborhood yard sale, a back-to-school picnic, and a movie night in the park. Riverside Meadows was becoming an actual community rather than just a collection of houses under the thumb of an authoritarian HOA. One evening, I was sitting on my porch with a book when Patricia walked by. She had not attended many community events, and I got the sense she felt awkward being around everyone after everything that had happened. "Patricia," I called out. "Want to sit for a minute?" She looked surprised but joined me on the porch. We sat in silence for a moment before she spoke. "The neighborhood looks good," she said quietly. "Better than it did under my leadership." "Different," I said. Not necessarily better or worse, just different. You are being kind, Patricia replied. It is better. People are actually happy. When I was in charge, everyone was just scared of getting fined. You were dealing with a lot of grief, I said. People make mistakes when they are hurting. That is generous of you to say, but it does not excuse how I acted. Patricia looked at the street, watching a couple of kids ride bikes. I have been doing some thinking and some therapy, actually. Turns out I was using the HOA to feel powerful because I felt so powerless about losing my husband. That makes sense, I said. I heard you are on the CCR review committee, she said. That is good. You will make sure the rules are fair. We talked for a while longer, and for the first time, I saw Patricia as a person rather than an adversary. She was smart and capable, but she had let her pain turn her into someone she did not want to be. Now she was trying to find a way forward, and that took its own kind of courage. September came, and with it the anniversary of my firewood incident. Tom joked about it at a board meeting, suggesting we declare it an official neighborhood holiday. I laughed it off, but privately I thought about how much had changed in a year. The CCR Review Committee finished its work in October, proposing a streamlined set of rules that focused on genuine community concerns rather than petty restrictions. We removed the approved color list, loosened the outdoor storage restrictions, and added clear procedures for fair enforcement, including a requirement for photographic evidence and a hearing process for any disputed violations. The community voted on the changes in November, and they passed with 85% approval. Riverside Meadows now had rules that made sense and a board that enforced them fairly. Winter returned, and once again, I fired up my wood stove. The oak burned beautifully, filling my house with warmth. On particularly cold nights, I would sit by the fire and remember that chaotic morning when Patricia had confronted me in my driveway, setting off a chain of events that transformed our neighborhood. In December, the neighborhood held its winter gathering again, and this time, Patricia attended. She stayed on the edges at first, clearly uncomfortable, but Mrs. Patel went over and invited her to sit by the fire. I watched as the two women talked, and slowly, Patricia began to relax. Later, Patricia came up to me. "Thank you for inviting me to sit on your porch that evening in August. I almost did not come tonight, but I remembered that conversation and thought maybe I could still be part of this community." "You are part of this community, Patricia. You always were. You just needed to learn to be a neighbor instead of a ruler." She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I am learning. It is a process." As the evening wound down and people began heading home, Tom stood up to make a quick announcement. "I just want to thank everyone for making this past year so great. We have turned Riverside Meadows into a real community, and I am proud to be your HOA president. Here is to more good years ahead." Everyone cheered, and I raised my cup of hot cider and a toast. My eyes caught the wood pile in my yard, much smaller now after a month of fires, but still neatly stacked and ready to keep me warm through the winter. I thought about Officer Martinez and Officer Patel, who had shown compassion when they could have just filed a report and left. I thought about Tom and Mr. Patel and all the neighbors who had stood up at that board meeting, turning what could have been a lonely fight into a community movement. I thought about Patricia, learning to be human again after years of hiding behind rigid rules and authority. Most of all, I thought about the simple act of standing up for yourself, even over something as mundane as firewood. Sometimes the smallest battles lead to the biggest changes. Sometimes refusing to back down against unfairness can transform not just your own situation, but an entire community. The fire crackled in the community pit. People laughed and talked, and the cold December night felt warm with human connection. This was what a neighborhood was supposed to be: people caring for each other, standing up for each other, and building something better together. I went home that night, added a few logs to my own fire, and sat in the peaceful quiet of my living room. The wood burned slowly, releasing the energy it had stored from years of sunlight, warming my home and my life. It had been worth fighting for, not just the firewood itself, but the principle it represented: the right to live peacefully in your own home without fear of arbitrary punishment or harassment. As I sat watching the flames dance, I made a mental note to order 5 cords for next year. If Patricia or anyone else had a problem with it, well, I knew exactly how to handle it. But I did not think there would be any problems. We had built something better here in Riverside Meadows, and it had all started with a simple pile of oak logs and a stubborn refusal to be bullied. The fire burned low, and I added another log, watching the flames catch and grow. Outside, snow began to fall, the first real snow of the season. Inside, my house was warm and cozy, heated by the wood I had fought for, in a neighborhood that had learned to be a real community. It was, I thought, a pretty good ending to what had started as a very frustrating situation. Sometimes things work out. Sometimes standing up for what is right leads to real change. And sometimes a pile of firewood is the spark that transforms an entire neighborhood for the better.